So, for those of you, thank you for coming. I'm going to talk to you tonight about a whole bunch of stuff. It's only wait, it is on. I am recording. I'm going to talk to you about a whole bunch of stuff that is only tangentially related, and it's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, right? It's this question of, well, what should the web do? So, I don't need a hell of a lot of an introduction, but for those of you that don't know me, hi, I'm Mike. I think you'll agree that that's a reasonable likeness of me. I'm not wearing the same shirt, but you can agree that it is me. I'm a Google developer expert in web technologies. This is now my second year being a GDE, so I am yet again in uncharted territory. They haven't kicked me out yet. So hopefully that means that I'm not stuffing up too badly. Okay. I work here at BBD along with Jerry in the research and development team here. Okay. And the reality is that I don't think I could succinctly explain to you what I do on a day-to-day basis. We do stuff, right? They pay us every month. They haven't fired us, and I have no written warning. So I think it's sort of working out, and I've been here for 6 years. This slide is completely redundant because while you're here, Jerry and I, with Len, who's unfortunately super, super busy, organized this show. So yay, we're really, really keen for you to be here. We're really keen for some of you to speak. So if you are interested in speaking, or if you'd like to scratch an itch, or if you think you've got something meaningful to share, let us know. We'll help you through it. We're really, really keen to take first-time speakers, and we give really, really good feedback. I think we give good feedback. Anyway, so I've got a little bit of a reputation at BBD, right? And this is to set you up for the rest of the talk. I can go on at length about JavaScript and the web. Jerry encouraged me to just not have slides at all and just talk for half an hour, but I felt like it was really, really important because otherwise how was I going to put memes in the presentation, right? And what's a presentation without memes anyway? So just so that you know, just keep in mind that this is going to flow. It may be a little bit tangential at times, and let's set expectations properly. This topic is also very, very near and dear to me. It's very, very personal to me. And the reason why is because my last round interview for the GDE program was with my dev hero, which is Adi Osmani, right? Who knows Adi Osmani? Yes, there are at least some hands, right? Super, super cool, and it was like the ultimate boss battle, right? I have to speak to my dev hero and answer a whole bunch of questions about the web. So I was all psyched out and all in the zone and thought I was doing really, really well, talking about how I speak a community and things about the web that interest me, and then he stumped me. He nailed me with this one question that has haunted me ever since, for the last 15 to 18 months. And that is, if you could change anything on the web, what would it be? I was unprepared for that, right? I had never even thought in those terms. What do you mean if I could change anything? It is just this thing that we use, right? But is it? Is it this thing that we just have to accept? So I've been thinking about this a lot, which has fueled this conversation, or this talk particularly, that's been brewing. And I figure that if we're going to answer this question, we're going to start off with, well, let's unpack what the web does, right? What do we use the web for? And I think the first and most emphatic answer is memes. As long as we can get that out of the way. We use it to share memes, to generate memes, and to make fun of popular culture. We also use it to post hilarious pictures of our pets. Maybe cats for those of us that are cat people, and for the correct people, we have dog pictures. Then we also talk a whole bunch of rubbish on social media, and that can be whatever flavor that you want, right? If you like sharing images, or we connect with one another. We connect with one another on silly human levels. We use this amazing platform to talk. Some of that's meaningful. Some of it isn't meaningful. Some of it's awful, like Instagram. But hey, Jerry likes Instagram, and we don't judge her for it. Then, what else is the web for? The web is for ads. No, really, it is for ads. And I think it's an important point, right? There's a lot of information that's coming at us, people trying to sell stuff to us. And it's only partly a joke because the web is for commerce. We buy stuff. Who's bought stuff this week from the web? Okay, at least some people, right? We use it as a commercial platform. I think it's disingenuous for us as software developers, professional software developers, or aiming to be professional software developers, to look at this platform that we build for as not being commercially viable, right? We want to get paid for this stuff. It needs to be an ecosystem that can support payment. News, information, right? We use this as a platform to disseminate very, very valuable critical information that saves lives, right? That changes political landscapes. We use this platform for knowledge. I have learned so much from it. I remember before the internet was ubiquitous. I remember how difficult it was looking up in encyclopedias. I still have encyclopedias at home. I haven't opened them up since the internet, right? Because we have amazing sources of information. We have encoded the sum total of human knowledge in a universally accessible mechanism. And that's something that I feel very, very passionate about. So, I think that's sort of, and there might be some bits and pieces that we're missing around the edge, but that's what we use it for, right? Does anybody else have anything salient to add? Any other things that we use it for that I've missed? Sorry? Gaming. There's exactly another way of us interacting with other human beings, right? I remember when we used to play games without being connected to the internet, right? When you had to drag your laptop or your desktop to a LAN party and actually see people in meet space to be able to frag them. Okay, so gaming, yes. Telecommunications, voice, connectivity. Like, let's be real. We just had a presentation from someone in Kenya. Okay? Like, that's pretty cool. So, the next question, before we go on to this, well, this is what it does. It is this thing that we have. Why should we really care? And I feel that this is an important one to dig into because we take a lot of this stuff for granted, right? It's just a thing. It's a thing that has always existed for some of you. Okay? And the reason why I think we should care is exemplified by, luckily, a tweet that happened just 4 days ago now, by David Hannemeyer Hansen. The web isn't just another software platform. It's the greatest software platform the world has ever seen. No permissions, no masters, readable source code. Let's protect the heritage, work in its service, and remind ourselves what a marvel it really is. And this resonated very heavily with me because that's the sense of responsibility I feel towards the web. It's not just software, right? It's software that we're all building together at the same time. And like, I'm gonna dig into a little bit of a history lesson. I'm gonna start going backwards and forwards in time. And I'm first going to go back now just over 20 years, a couple weeks over 20 years ago. This gentleman said the following stuff about the World Wide Web.
No, you see, I don't agree. I think the internet, I don't think we've even seen the tip of the iceberg. I think the potential of what the internet is going to do to society, both good and bad, is unimaginable. I think we're actually on the cusp of something exhilarating and terrifying.
It's just a tool, though, isn't it?
No, it's not. No, it's an alien life form.
What do you think when you think then about
Is there life on Mars? Yes, it's just landed here.
But it's simply a different delivery system there. You're arguing about something more profound.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about the actual context, and the state of content is going to be so different to anything that we can really envisage at the moment, where the interplay between the user and the provider will be so in simpatico. It's going to crush our ideas of what mediums are all about.
Okay, so this is David Bowie in Newsnight in 1999, right? And he's clearly a very intelligent man, and this was a few years after the internet or the World Wide Web really became mainstream, right? When it really started crashing in, and this was at the height of the dot-com boom. Now, he's clearly an intelligent man. He's departed, as those who know Bowie is dead. I'm not saying he was holding the fabric of reality together, but it does feel like we're on the darker timeline some days. But this was 20 years ago, right? Let's talk about a little bit further back. Let's talk about 50 years ago. And in fact, coming up March, it's the 50th anniversary of this. So who knows where these pictures are taken from? Anybody? Other than Jerry, because I've been talking to her about it for a week. Okay, that gentleman is called Douglas Engelbart, okay? The basic creator of the mouse. You can see the first version of the mouse that was built for this demo in the bottom right-hand corner of the left-hand picture, okay? This is titled The Mother of All Demos, and it happened at the American Computer Manufacturers Association in 1968, where he showed the first working version of a software editor, the first working version of a mouse. He showed the first working version of document sharing and live document editing of voice communications in 1968, before anything existed, right? The ideas here were not necessarily his own. He cobbled them together by ideas that had preceded him. And in fact, the idea of this networked sharing of information was built off of something created or theorized by a gentleman by the name of Vannevar Bush in 1948. Okay? His idea was we could link information together on microfilm, and he called this thing a memex. Okay? And that basic theory from 1948 ended up resulting in the World Wide Web that we use today. Okay? So when we think of the revolutionary new feature that is React hooks, let's keep some perspective on what revolution means and what real innovation looks like. Okay? I'm not heading on React. I'm not heading on React. But history lesson aside, and I believe that this is compulsory watching for any software developer, right? You should see this. We should understand our heritage, where we come from. But moving a little bit forward in time from that heritage, who knows what that is? Who can give me a wild guess as to what that is? That is the first website, okay? Published from the CERN offices. This is actually a snapshot of that website. It's not the 1989 version. It's the 1992 version that they've kept up for posterity. They unfortunately couldn't keep the 1989 one up for whatever reason. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. Are you still running the live stream thing?
No, I closed it down. I apologize to him for me. So this is the first humble website that was created as a part of the World Wide Web in 1989 when it went live in 1991. And it was created by this gentleman, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Okay? And all he did is he built on the work of others. He didn't invent the internet, the network of networks. That had existed already. There are other people that did amazing work. There were other people that theorized this idea of linking information, being Vannevar Bush's memex, almost a half a century previously to him even. Maybe not, like 40 years, 30 years, whatever the case may be. And he built all of this stuff up and invented the World Wide Web while at CERN. Okay? How we could, rather than having to log on to different computers and copy information locally to be able to view it, we could link that in a distributable, crawlable, public manner, right? It's the difference between accessing a file server to seeing a document versus accessing what we now know as a web page. So a really, really important invention. He then went on to, in about 1992, I think it's 92, form an organization of which he was the head, called the World Wide Web Consortium, okay, to look after this, this amazing invention that was the World Wide Web. And they had a set of a mission and a set of visions that proceed to this day. Now, this is a snapshot of what this mission and vision look like at this moment. And that's to say that this World Wide Web, this invention, is a web for all, for every human being. That it's a web on everything. It needs to be accessible on every device, every form factor. It mustn't be predictive as to where it can be used. It needs to be, and this is a relatively new one, a web for rich interaction. It mustn't just present documents and present information. It needs to enable experiences for people, right? A web of data and services that we expose our data as being inherently linkable, our services as being inherently consumable by one another, creating this global composited interface, if that makes sense. And then the last one is that this web of trust. And I don't think we always do so well with that one, but the idea is that we should understand what is trustworthy information and what is not. When are we safe and when are we exposed? And I think as developers, we understand that sometimes, and we understand some of the constraints. But as human beings, we suck and we need to get better, right? So, enough of the history lesson. Let's cast our view forward a little bit and ask another question. Where is the web headed? Okay? I don't know how many of you have actually looked and thought about this. So before we can figure out where the web is going, I think we need to look at the slice in time of what the focus is of an organization like the W3CR. And this is the stuff that they care about representing in the web. Commerce, It needs to be a commercially viable platform, an open marketplace where everyone can compete, right? Entertainment, we use it for interesting things, right? Entertainment is a fundamental part of the human condition. Communication, speaking to one another. Payments, again, the other side of that commerce marketplace. We need to be able to safely transact online. We're going to buy stuff via this platform. Things, it's no longer just browsers on a big CRT desktop like Tim Berners-Lee had. It's everything we touch that's somehow connected to the internet. Some people's toasters and washing machines and fridges are connected. How does this all work together? Accessibility. We've been relatively poor with surfacing this information to very few people. Accessibility is important to people that, I don't know, may not be able to see effectively, may not be able to consume media the same way as we assume that they should be able to. Internationalization. People that don't necessarily speak English want to consume this resource. And that's always been a big concern, and it continues to be a big concern today. How do you code for the web and work with the web if you don't speak English? It's not easy. And then finally, security and the representation of data in this consumable manner. These are all important facets. Sure, question?
My question is simple. I never really understood what the hell is going on when it comes to the elites and the politics. So there are those who say that information when it comes to the internet should be available for everyone, but there are also those regulations. I never really understood how are these regulations set up. It's like country's government can set up how we should use the internet. In fact, how does it all work? How does it all link together? Because now someone is saying information will be free for all. If we want to know what is happening with the South African government, everything should be available there. The US government, NASA, whatever, secret agents, those kind of stuff. So what leads to those kind of stuff, like those debates?
So ask the same question again at the end of it, right? I think that's valuable, but I think there's a little bit more context that you need, because you're right. There are a lot of countries involved. There are a lot of people from different backgrounds involved in how we use this thing. So I'm going to focus a little bit on how we build on this thing rather than how we consume on this thing, because we're all programmers here, okay? But I think it's valuable asking that question, and I think just hang on to it, okay? So what I'm going to look at next is I'm going to look at some features as to where the web's going that you may or may not be aware of. Give me a nod if you are aware of it, because this is all stuff that's in the short to medium term. Okay? So we're going to start off with the commerce aspect. We've got the payment request API. Who's put their credit card into a website and not known whether it's going to be stolen? Okay? That's terrifying. Or used a service like PayPal, so you don't have to do that, right? Security is a big deal, and security with payments. We need to be able to tender payment safely and effectively and with trust. So the payment request API is a way of abstracting that a little bit so that the browser has a consistent interface behind asking you for money. So you can save your credit cards in something you trust, or put your details into a text box that's Chrome-based rather than, or Firefox-based rather than some random pop-up on a website, okay? So I think that's a big one for us as consumers and as service providers, because we want people to feel comfortable buying our services in a safe mechanism online. The web share API, okay? Who's gone to a website that has 1 million social media icons and you're like, oh man, the social media icon that I want doesn't work. Or it doesn't work the same way to share to Twitter as the previous site that I was on that shared to Twitter. So you know what, I'm going to do it myself, okay? This is something where native has gotten it far better. Like OS level integration for sharing and sharing social content is very, very good. The web is playing catch up, and this is a way of encoding that so that we can have a consistent mechanism to share our information. Why? Because if we share our information consistently, we respect the rights of the IP holders better. We have a better mechanism to trust the stuff that we're putting into the text box that's somewhere on somebody's computer. Okay, so moving on from that. Then we've got Web USB. Who knows about Web USB? Okay, why do we need Web USB? What is this rubbish? Well, that's because who has an old computer with old peripherals that no longer work, right? Because you update your operating system and the drivers don't update. That's a real problem. Our platforms suck, right? We want a consistent way of engaging with the stuff that we can use across Mac, Windows, Linux, and whatever operating system comes in the future. We want the browser to be our operating system so that the browser is not just the surface of the screen, it's all the stuff that it interacts with. And this is predominantly driven by our need to compete with native. Now, WebXR. Who understands what I mean when I say XR? Okay, Jerry, because I've been talking at it. So who understands what I mean when I say VR? Right? Who understands what I mean when I say AR? Now, XR is this idea of anything that adds shape to the web, either depth or breadth or volume or additional information, merges our realities. Okay? This is a really, really interesting and growing field from a device perspective and from how we engage with the world. We don't care about flat documents anymore, right? We're exploring interactivity, different ways of engaging with the world around us, and we expect the web to grow with us in that sense. Otherwise, if it's just forever remains an analogy for some paper-oriented document that's just linkable, it loses some of its relevance. Okay? WebAssembly. Who knows what I mean when I say this? Okay? Right, so WebAssembly is this idea that JavaScript is great. We like JavaScript because it interacts well with the DOM. It serves a very particular problem. But there's a whole bunch of either old code or really, really performant optimized code that will never, ever run on the web. And JavaScript as a compile target is really awful. Taking your C# code or your Java code or Go and generating it to JavaScript is just an awful idea. It's not meant for that, right? So WebAssembly is this idea that we want to make this a more open platform for everyone, to give better constructs for more performant code, for better ways of building stuff for the web. So WebAssembly gives us this lower level primitive that lets us reach into the heart and soul of the machine, still sandboxed by the security that we come to trust in the browser, and do cool stuff. Okay? Awesome. WebAuthn API. Now, I'm pretty sure nobody knows what I'm talking about here. Okay? Everybody in this room has entered a password into a website, right? Everyone's had password details emailed to them by haveyoubeenporn.com, right? Or you reuse passwords because you can't remember a million of them. Or you've got a password manager. I've got a password manager. Passwords suck, right? They're transmitted in plain text. They're awful. They're a terrible mechanism. They're insecure inherently by design. WebAuthn is this idea of we can be better than passwords, and we can use asymmetric cryptography to generate private-public key pairs and use that to log in, to guard our identity online. A far more secure mechanism, like who uses SSH keys, right? So some people using SSH keys to log into websites, right? And using security identifiers. I've got one in my bag where you've got a cheap $5 little plastic key that you can plug in and push, and it generates a public-private key pair that I can move between machines. That's my identity. Like, this is amazing stuff, and this is now. You can use this now. And then stuff that's coming, web portals. Now, did anybody watch Chrome Dev Summit where they talked about web portals and the idea for a new internet? Changing the way we navigate between pages and surfacing it. This is basically iframe 2.0, right? Doing it properly for a change so that we can show moving between different realms, moving between different pages in our site far more naturally and progressively. Web packaging, okay? We're still tied to this idea, even though we've got this decentralized framework or this decentralized platform, we're still tied to this idea of having to visit a origin to serve a site. Web packaging is this concept that we can take all of our website, build it, sign it properly, and then have anyone serve it. Who should care, right? As long as it's actually our content where it comes from. And that means that it's far more performant for us, for example's sake. We don't have to pay that 300 millisecond tax to go download something from West Europe. And this is a thing that is being pushed for very heavily. Has anybody heard of the AMP project, Accelerated Mobile Pages, or played around with AMP? This is basically AMP standardized. Okay. So that's some of the stuff that's coming. This is the cool stuff that's coming down the road. And this all sounds great, right? Who thinks this sounds, anybody? Like, anybody still excited? I think this is awesome stuff. But some of it, like portals, I don't know. I didn't think there was really a problem. WebUSB, I think, is great. WebAssembly is great, but not all of it is stuff that I care about. So let's unpack that a little bit. How did this stuff come to being? How was this the direction that we went? Okay? Now, you would be forgiven if you said the W3C was it. This organization that Tim Berners-Lee organized and still exists and manages the standard and makes sure that HTML and the browsers do what they need to do. Who thinks that's the answer? Or have I already prompted you? I've already prompted you. Who's heard of the What Working Group? Okay. Yes, Jerry. So in 2004, Mozilla, Opera, and Safari, after a W3C meeting where they were deciding on XHTML, and I know at least one person's going to nod sagely in the room when I say XHTML. When they were particularly happy about the direction of HTML, they decided that they were going to go and develop HTML in a much more open manner. Okay? They were going to organize their own thing, their own working group, and then several years later, in 2008, they decided, right, we'll have HTML5 done in the year 2022. Now, that wasn't acceptable to anybody, right? That was an awful answer. And they were seeing the web atrophy really quickly. So they decided, this is an awful joke. We're going to take control. We're going to run the standard. Okay? And the W3C was like, wait, but aren't we the standard provider? What do you mean you're going to run the standard? We're running the standard. We have our own standard. And then over time, there was this impasse where they were driving the standard forward in a living manner, in an open, publicly accessible way, and the W3C was trying to catch up and trying to make sure that they merged it. There are versions of the What Working Group HTML spec that were forked and copied into the W3C that have died. There are multiple versions. There's 5, 5.1, there's a living standard. And the net result is, I mean, this question of like, why? Why is this a problem? Why are we in this world? And unfortunately, it's where we are. So perhaps to shed a little bit of light on HTML and some of the key standards, like fetch, for example's sake, like the DOM itself. How the W3C works is it has standards recommendations that it proposes. So when you get to rec, which is the far right-hand side, that's the recommendation of how a browser should work with something with 2 browser implementations that prove that it works. Okay? So that means that browsers have to implement it properly before it gets to rec. On the far left-hand side, they accept input from 2 sources, one of which is an organized workshop, and the other one is this WIC-G, which is a web incubation group, where they're trying something weird and radical and very, very different that may not result in anything, but is time-boxed to about a year. Okay? Now, out of that whole structure, either via a workshop or the working group, we get this working draft specification. We get this idea of we're going to start growing a standard, however long that may take. Then that goes to a candidate recommendation, and the candidate recommendation goes to a proposed recommendation, and the proposed recommendation, once it's got 2 browsers that have implemented, goes to an actual, okay, cool, this is now a recommendation. So that's a little bit heavy-handed. Some of you may recognize that as a very waterfall-oriented approach. Okay? But the real challenge is this, that all of that is driven by W3C members. You have to pay to be a W3C member. Only the big organizations or independent bodies are people who have input into this process. Okay? And in fact, workshops are only composed of W3C members. You may get an opportunity as the general public. So there's 2 ways that you can interact with this process. And this is as best as we can explain this opaque process. Jerry can attest to the fact that I've been trying to figure this stuff out for a little while. You can comment on proposed recommendations as they go through and try and raise awareness on the internet, or the working incubation groups, when they're spitballing a really random idea, they have their own community that they're required to listen to. And if you can engage in that community, you can shape the view of where this proposal is going before it's too late. But by the time it gets to recommendation, like, you've got 2 browsers that are working like that, there's no way you can change it really, right? That's why we still have the marquee tag. Anyway, so this is maybe a little bit of insight into why that schism between the What Working Group and the W3C happened. But that's only part of the problem, right? The other thing that we rely on, and is very relevant to us being the JavaScript meetup group, is this idea of JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is a trademark owned by Oracle. I don't know how many people that's news to, okay, but it is a fact. The JavaScript that we actually write is called ECMAScript, ECMA script, yes.
So basically the web is not open, it's not an open source thing, it's run by a company.
No, it's run by an institution. So that's an important point. There's a difference between open standard and open source, right? Open source you can take and modify and go on, and there are parts of the web that are open source. But open standard means that everyone can see what the standard is. You don't have to pay for it. Like there are other standards, ISO standards particular, or some ISO standards and some other things. I think IEEE is one of them, where you have to pay to get whatever that standard may be. Okay, you have to pay them to be able to see it. So the web is open standard definitely, and some parts of it are open source. And that's a big difference between the W3C, which is the open standard view, and the WAT working group, that's the open source view. Does that make sense?
So one cannot just manipulate the web and make their own thing on the web?
You can. The mechanisms for doing that are a little bit more complicated. Okay. So where was I? Right. So I'm just quickly going to talk to you about ECMAScript so we understand that, because this is the part where we probably really engage with. So we write ECMA script. Now ECMA is the European Computer Manufacturers Association that was given in the mid-90s JavaScript to look after. Hey, here's this thing that we wrote. We think it needs to be standardized. Look after it. And then by the late 90s, the European Computer Manufacturers Association was like, well, it doesn't really make sense for this to be a European thing, and they formed ECMA International. So much like so many acronyms, ECMA doesn't actually stand for anything anymore. It's the organization name. Of particular interest to us is this working committee, which is Technical Committee 39, and those are the awesome people that, in a very open manner, grow and evolve JavaScript. Just JavaScript, not web APIs, just the language. Okay. All right. So, I've told you a whole bunch of stuff. I've rambled through all of this, and I share with you now the question that has haunted me ever since that interview day, right? What should the web do? Now, I bet you're waiting for an answer, right? No, you'd be wrong, because I still don't know. And I think the important part is that we need to talk about this. This isn't just a thing that exists. This isn't just a fait accompli that we must accept that other people are developing, right? We may not be able to change it as easily. We may not be able to go into the W3C and hack away at something. But we can speak to the incubation group. We can speak to people who are listening to community. We can talk about Africa. What is it that we want about it? Right? What do we want the web to do?